Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast. On this episode, I will be speaking to Dr. Tarek Younis, who has just launched his book called The Muslim State and Mind, Psychology in Times of Islamophobia. We delve into his research and his work in psychology and also in a clinical setting. He is a senior lecturer at Middlesex University, and we have a really thought-provoking conversation, inshallah, that I hope you enjoy. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Younis. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mindful Muslim podcast today. How are you?
Alaikum salam. I'm fine, alhamdulillah. How about
Alhamdulillah,
yourself?
fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me again. I guess to start, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself to our viewers, give a little background on yourself, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go ahead and give the short story, and then you can ask for the nitty-gritty if you like. So my name is Tarek Younis. I'm a senior lecturer at Middlesex University in the Department of Psychology. My areas of specialties in psychology roughly revolve around issues of culture, racism, Islamophobia, and psychology. And those are the subjects that I often teach on. In more recent years, I've kind of enveloped those more naturally within what I would call the umbrella of politics. So sort of the politics of psychology. And I think there's a lot of overlap of how different groups are racialized, the way racism operates. So not necessarily only about Muslims, but that's more or less sort of who I am. I am also a practicing clinical psychologist, and that all of this sort of naturally informs the sort of work that I do.
Amazing. I guess we also just wanted to congratulate you on the release of your new book. And we had the pleasure of promoting that as well recently. So I just wanted to congratulate you. Can you tell us a little bit more about also the inspiration behind the book, what motivated you to write it, the title, all of that?
Yeah, so the inspiration behind the book, I think my book was largely inspired just by years of, many different roads sort of leading to Rome. The Rome being the book. I had my clinical practice dealing with brothers and sisters, largely who've experienced different forms of Islamophobia, different forms of marginalization. My research background being in Islamophobia, my doctorate thesis many years ago looked at how Muslims are marginalized across the global north. I specifically looked at Germany, Denmark, and Canada at the time. And I think just sort of a rising awareness of certain gaps in our attention towards how Muslims are impacted by Islamophobia and how we as mental health professionals position ourselves in attending to those dynamics of Islamophobia, so to speak. So that was all those kind of married organically to like be the background inspiration of the book. I must admit, I also kind of accepted writing the book at the worst possible time in my life. And I think it was my relationship with the book was at one point really of trying to, frame certain ideas as legibly as possible, as concretely as possible. I didn't want to write a book where it became too complicated or too complex, both for the readers, but also for myself, to really just bring it down. This is something that hopefully will be an accessible book that if anyone's interested in psychology and or Islamophobia, they'd be able to access it.
Inshallah, I hope that it does resonate with the community and the wider community as well, whether they are Muslims or otherwise. I guess one of the first questions I wanted to dive into was about Islamophobia and psychology, as you've mentioned, the realms that you work in. There's a debate about the definition of what Islamophobia actually is. Yeah. So for yourself and having worked in this realm for years, what do you define Islamophobia to be?
So I think there's an official definition, and then there's a definition that I put to work, so to speak, in the book. So I think the official definition is one that many people, different groups, different organizations have promoted over the years, which is that Islamophobia is a form of racism towards Muslims. And we can talk about that further. What does that mean for Muslims to be racialized? One of the definitions I put to work in my book, and I can explain to you what I mean by putting to work, but the definition I work off of in the book is that Islamophobia is about managing ideal Muslim thoughts and behaviors. That there's certain boundaries of what an ideal Muslim is in terms of how they think and how they identify themselves and how they behave. And these boundaries are sort of imposed upon us in certain ways. And, brushing against those boundaries can result in certain negative consequences, so to speak. Now, certainly, just for the fact that someone, let's say, is racialized as a Muslim, even if they don't even identify as a Muslim. I'll give an example here. We know that Sikhs are attacked on the street, because they're identified as a Muslim.
And
they appear as a Muslim, right? So one's identity or one's choice in the matter is actually quite irrelevant. Just the embodiment of Muslimness there already has very strong significance. So, what these boundaries are obviously quite fluid. But I think that's a very important point, at least when we start intersecting it with psychology.
And what are some of those examples that were kind of coming to your mind when you were thinking about, that definition of what you were working off of in your book?
Yeah. I gave a bunch of stories, actually. So there's a bunch of cases, and I can maybe introduce them to you here. I mean, I think there's the case. So I tried to juxtapose, or I tried to put together 3 different cases of Islamophobia within a therapeutic setting. And the cases are quite different, just to show that these boundaries of Islamophobia, there's different histories to it. Islamophobia is not simply, I hate Muslims, but, there's complexities behind it, and we need to be able to grapple with all those complexities. So in a nutshell, there's the case of Ahmed, who went to see a therapist, and, the racialized white therapist saw that Ahmed's faith, played some sort of role in his anxiety, right? His belief in Allah, the irrationality behind his faith, his convictions in Islam. The second case is that of a sister, a Muslim woman who wears a niqab, and she went to see a therapist for trauma, and the therapist told her that one of the signs of successful treatment will be her ability to remove her niqab. Okay. And then the third case is that of Ibrahim, who, these are all made up names, by the way. So I can literally just make up any name right now. I'm just trying to stay consistent with the book. The case of Ibrahim, who is actually experiencing or was experiencing very acute discrimination in prisons by the prison staff. And when he went to see a psychologist there, and he shared the experiences that he was going through, the psychologist wanted to teach him mindfulness techniques, it's sort of like breathing exercises to manage or to better manage the distress that he was experiencing. And so these three cases are actually, we might sort of bunch them up, I guess, rather simply under Islamophobia. But actually, each one of these cases exemplify different histories, different trajectories, different ways in which Muslim thinking, Muslim identity is managed or marginalized in different ways. And I think I can certainly, if you like, we can go into every single one of these cases and sort of unpack them. But, you know, it's cases like those where I'm sitting there and I'm realizing, you know, just saying, oh, this is Islamophobia and that's Islamophobia and that's Islamophobia is not really doing justice to all the nuances of how Islamophobia operates, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be amazing to delve a little bit deeper into one or all three of the cases. That would be fantastic. So, in terms of the first case study that you mentioned, what are some of the sort of historical aspects that you think sort of led to that experience for that individual?
Yeah, okay. So the case with Ahmed, that's, you know, I think that's often sort of the common case that's referred to when we think about, you know, how do Muslims fit into the sort of, I guess you could say, secular therapeutic settings, right? So we think about issues of cultural sensitivity, religious sensitivity, cultural competency, etc. And so just off the bat, there's something about the fact that this therapist saw, or was, whatever his intention is or whatever the problem is, if it's ignorance, if it's prejudice, whatever, you know, we can put that aside for the moment. We recognize there is a very distinct history of Islam's role in the Western world. Islam was always positioned as an other to liberalism here in the Western world, right? So in the West, people didn't just, I mean, I'm making a lot of blanket statements here just for the sake of simplicity, you know, but people didn't just sit around a table and be like, okay, what are liberal values in terms of freedom, liberty, whatever it might be? You know, it was always positioned vis-a-vis an other. And there's actually a really fantastic book called Islam and Liberalism that showed that how Western values were developed in contradistinction to Islam and to an other, right? And Islam and Muslims always occupied that role of being on the boundary of Western world. And we know that, and we see that continuously in debates and issues around, you know, do Muslims fit into Western society, and the constant sort of sensationalizing of this issue. So one of the ways that's manifested itself is this idea that Islam is irrational, right? Versus the West and secular values are the rational, right? The logical sort of way of experiencing oneself. And sort of the irrationality of Islam, you know, has a long-standing history in the Western world. And so just that case with Ahmed, we can't just simply one could just simply reduce it like, oh, it's just prejudicial and he needs to be educated that Islam is not irrational. But I think that takes away from the history of how that is commonsensical, right? The commonsensical, what people will call hegemonic. Hegemonic means that sort of commonsensical idea that there's something about Islam that's odd.
Almost like inherent, that kind of view is there.
Exactly. It's inherent. There's something about Islam that's odd, that doesn't fit here somehow, right? And it's almost like this sort of natural instinct or reaction really towards Islam.
Absolutely. I mean, over time, one can imagine certain historical things that have occurred are, you know, staying with people. So whether it's a therapist or not, you know, they will show up.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
In terms of the second case you mentioned about the female Muslim.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, and then I'll put it together with Ahmed actually to show, like, highlight some of the differences. So I think this case is really fascinating and important. And the sister herself, she actually published her own story in a book, which is excellent, which we can share, inshallah. So what I find very powerful here, she went to see a therapist. And let's imagine now the therapist is smiling and is saying that they want to help her, right? Like, I want to help you. One of the signs of successful treatment will be your ability to take off your headscarf, right? It comes from this place of wanting to empower the client, so to speak. So I just want to hold on to that moment, because I think often when we talk about Islamophobia, we think about it in terms of hostility, immediately, right? Like that's how we often think about any form of racism.
For
really.
sure. And it's very kind of obvious to pick out and say, that's that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a little bit more aggressive, maybe not so undertone, and yeah.
That's it. Which in this case, she's smiling, right? It's inviting. It's for the purpose of like the client's well-being or whatever. And you know, there's a long history. There's a long history there too. I mean, Malcolm X famously made the distinction between the wolves and the foxes. The wolves are those who are out to attack us, right? Like I've been attacked on the street before. You know, I've had someone come and spit and kick at me, and it's like, you know, get out of my country, right? So those are the wolves. The foxes are those that invite you in with a smile, right? And so they kind of try to lure you in, and then, you know, eventually bite you, of course. So I think there's something about that smile I think is important for us to hold on to, because this is what we call liberal racism, which I think we as Muslims have yet to really understand and conceptualize. But where is it coming from? I mean, this idea of, you know, empowering the Muslim woman, there's a long-standing sort of colonial and imperial history here of the West's relationship with Islam and Muslim majority countries. I mean, the Iraq War was famously justified, you know, on the premise of we want to liberate Muslim women from like their cultural and religious, you know, regressive practices.
Yeah, as a veil to all the other things that we may have read since then about that.
Yes, absolutely. And also the fact that it highlights how the hijab and niqab remains like a constant sort of like battlefield, you know, like across the global north. We see in Quebec the hijab ban, niqab bans in France and Denmark and other places. So there's something about the signifier of the hijab and niqab and Muslim, what we call Muslim agency, Muslim women's agency, like their ability to choose for themselves, again, is commonsensical. So it belongs sort of within, like, you know, the narratives that would naturally enter into any setting, right? And in this case, it's in a therapy. And so, you know, maybe just putting Ahmed and Layla together very quickly, you know, Ahmed, we could see a very particular sort of history there, again, Islamophobia. With Layla, there's again also a very particular history, and we can draw those narratives to make sense of that. And I think that's what we kind of really need to do. I think the therapeutic settings do provide a very interesting sort of lens in teasing all those out. But obviously psychology also plays a role in this.
No, absolutely. I guess a little bit more, just sticking with Islamophobia, it would be great to hear either other case studies or things that come to mind in sort of explaining Islamophobia and the impact that it has, not just on individuals, but to the people around them, their communities, you know, that kind of wider level.
That's a really good question. And to be fair to all the different people who I think have been working on this question, I think that is sort of the main, I would say, approach to our understanding of Islamophobia, is trying to document especially the negative outcomes, right? This is sort of what's called the public health approach. You know, so by documenting the negative outcomes of a phenomenon, in this case Islamophobia, it helps sort of, I guess, bear witness to the fact that it's real, right? We know there's many sort of outcomes, both on the individual level. I mean, you didn't want to talk about that, but we know individually, you know, in terms of anxiety, among other things, you know, there's a lot of different things, experiences, especially.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely delve into that. I mean, on a personal level, if you've had, I assume, a similar experience to what you've had with a physical attack, that's absolutely trauma and can stay with you for such a long time and change the way you think about other people around you.
Absolutely. And I think there's probably something there where I think we should allow ourselves for some nuance as well. There's some forms of violence towards Muslims that are considered potentially more legitimate than other forms of violence. This is something that, you know, what sort of violence towards, or what sort of suffering of Muslims at the hands of Islamophobia is more legible, by legible, I mean understandable, that other people can perceive and say, oh yeah, that was really violent. That's what happened to you, and that's a problem. So when I share that story, I often share with the intention to say that, okay, most people, when I say that, will recognize that was a terrible thing that happened to you, Tariq. Like, you know, I hope you're okay. But I'd like to always bring that side by side with, let's say, Muslim mothers who are threatened by social services to have their children removed from them because, you know, they're designated, or their husbands were designated, let's say, as XYZ, you know, extremist, terrorist, whatever it might be. And suddenly they have the entire sort of state security apparatus come down on them. And I've spoken to such mothers. I mean, subhanAllah, I can't even express the words of the suffocation, the anxiety that they feel of, you know, my children are about to be removed from me, and there's nothing they can do about it. Now, the attack that happened to me is Islamophobic, and it can be easily read by most people as such. But, you know, the experience that sister or that mother is going through is something that becomes far more complicated to read, that, you know, that is not simply one that we can all point at and say that this is Islamophobic. That's actually a very big problem of what I would call legibility. So what kind of Muslim suffering, at what hands, what forms of violence are we able to mobilize on, and which ones are we not able to mobilize on? As someone who used to consult for the Montreal police many years ago, and, you know, I've been interested in researching and writing on Islamophobia, you know, for a long time, I can tell you, like, for certainly, we haven't really been able to mobilize on Muslim suffering vis-a-vis Islamophobia beyond that physical verbal abuse much, right? It remains that sort of level, and I think one of the purposes of the book is really to say, look, there's all these different forms of experience of Islamophobia, and especially when it's legitimized through the state in some way, shape, or form, as we're seeing right now towards undocumented migrants, right? I mean, here in the UK, just recently, undocumented migrants are incredibly vilified. I mean, there's all these different expressions of state violence that we have really yet to capture, I think, as a community.
No, absolutely. What comes to mind really, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the things you've mentioned about sort of more subtle, almost Islamophobia that's going on, that we're A, not aware of, and also B, not being able to address and then do anything about. Would you say they are microaggressions, or is that a term that is not appropriate in this sense?
I don't mind microaggressions. I mean, we can call it what we like. My only issue with microaggression is I think it still makes it about that one individual.
Okay.
You know, so it just makes it about that one person, rather than, I think what I'm trying to maybe point out a little bit more is more about policies, you know, political climates, things like that, like these are the different things that if, you know, I did my research on the PREVENT policy.
Yes.
Which is a policy, for anyone who doesn't know, where, let's say, mental health professionals are they're told to have due regard in identifying and reporting individuals they suspect might become terrorists in the future or are susceptible to radicalization, right? So now, the reason why I'm thinking about that as a policy is because if a Muslim mental health, or if there's a mental health professional sitting across from a Muslim who's wearing the niqab and suddenly feels, or puts on the niqab, and this is a real case example.
Okay.
You know, and suddenly, well, the case example actually has to do with the hijab. A woman converting to Islam, putting on the hijab. Prior to that, she was suffering from severe domestic violence, like really terrible domestic violence. She converts to Islam, and suddenly the mental health team, it was at an NHS, they're prioritizing the possibility of radicalization over her domestic violence. And what I'm trying to get at with that is that certainly we can call this potentially a form of microaggression, right? That's not really explicitly hostile towards the patient. But my point is that what's fundamentally at fault is that it's the policy that's sort of legitimizing and reinforcing these attitudes to be upheld in the first place, right? And so I'm more concerned of how Islamophobic attitudes, which are really quite rampant, are continuously and in fact increasingly legitimized through policies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. So when it comes to your research and Prevent, did you delve deeper into kind of other institutions or places or settings, say education or elsewhere that you can kind of delve into a little bit more here for us now? Because you mentioned the NHS and mental health practitioners, or I'm guessing psychologists as well, have this sort of responsibility, I guess, to refer people or patients if they think they're at risk. I mean, are there criteria? Like how is this actually working in real life? Is it a tick box situation? Like what is it, a feeling that they go off?
You just hit all the nails on the head. It is a feeling. They're taught in the Prevent. So when I did my research, one of the things that I was really highlighting was the fact that in training, they are told to follow their gut feelings, right? So they're told. It's the same logic as if anyone travels in London, they'll hear a constant refrain in the trains, which is see it, say it, sorted, right? See it, say it, sorted is really, you see something, you feel something's weird, say it to the police, they'll get it sorted. It's that exact philosophy, right? It's really trying to institutionalize gut feelings, which is highly problematic from any sort of anti-racist perspective. You don't have to, you can choose anyone you want. It's problematic.
Completely subjective, completely
Absolutely.
off of just personal opinion.
That's it.
Prejudice. Wow.
Yeah, it's really bad. You actually said something else which is also equally true. I forgot now what it is. Oh, I guess you were asking also about other settings. I mean, I think it's very clear that it's, especially in education, that's where a lot of Prevent was mostly sort of contested. But, I think maybe to bring a very particular case that I always hold true to my heart, and I think this is important for us as mental health professionals, as Muslims in the community who are interested in Muslim distress. One of the earliest cases, it's not a case that I wrote about, but it's just a random Muslim young adult. She was 17 that I spoke with very early on. We just got to talking, and she told me that because of the Prevent policy, she's been withholding sharing her thoughts and opinions about things for years. She was 17. And that really struck me as so powerful, that suffocation that she might be feeling, that anxiety. I mean, imagine you're 17 years old, and for years you feel like you've been suffocating yourself, right? And I feel like, we as a community have done very little of really, I think, appreciating the qualitative impact of that, right? Like we might sit down and be like, okay, for how many years have you been suffocated? Like, 2, 3, but even if it was just for 1 minute, there's something very powerful in that experience that she might be going through, that, in terms of the distress or whatever it is, that we haven't really held on to, or haven't been able to really attend to, at least. And so, I think there's a lot in schools that's important. You asked also about how it works in terms of checkboxes. So some mental health trusts actually do have the whole counter-extremism checkboxes, which is like, I maybe I don't want to go into too many details now, so I don't complicate it, but they're just really arbitrary.
Fine.
Like, does this person exhibit like us and them thinking or whatever?
Okay.
And just they're very random and arbitrary. And they embedded that within NHS mental health trusts
Yeah.
For risk assessments for all their patients. So all patients become screened for potential extremism. And this is where any anti-racist with his 2 cents is going to come in and be like, whoa, that's really, really problematic. Because as we were talking about, if Muslims are racialized to being regressive, potentially violent, unable to control their anger, all these things are well documented in research, right? I mean, there's psychological theories in psychological journals published until today, where that association between Muslims and anger and all of this are still made and sort of still developed and reproduced. So we know that if a Muslim were to go into such a mental health setting, they're far more likely to elicit that sort of gut feeling in that mental health trust than just a random white person.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And sad and worrying that those policies are there. And this is, I think, not sort of uncommon around the globe. And if we kind of stick to maybe thinking a little bit more about the UK, do you have knowledge around sort of policing and how, I suppose, Muslims are almost targeted in a way, or racialized, as you've mentioned before, or at more sort of risk of being stopped or checked up on, or those kind of things. Can we delve a little bit into policing?
Yeah, we can. I don't have all the statistics off my head, and I think it's important for me to also make a link that it's not just about prevent, and even just not about Muslims, right? So there's something about racism which speaks to anyone who's not white, right? So if we think about stop and search policies, I don't remember the exact statistic off my head. I think racialized black youth in London are 30 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police. Something like that. I might be wrong about the exact statistic, but it's significantly higher. We know border policing. I think with Schedule 7 arrests, or it's called Schedule 7 stops, when a border police suspects that there might be anything worth highlighting about potential terrorism for a passenger, that they'll stop them in the airport. And I believe the statistic, again, I might be wrong, is something like 95% of those stops are all Muslims. And often it can even be the same person many times. So they'll go and, they'll be stopped and they'll be stopped coming back. And we know so many of these stories now. And because Schedule 7 arrests are so intrusive and so disruptive as well, because you might be held for 6 hours just to be questioned. They take your phones, they take everything, right? Like, these sound like, as we're talking about it, these sound like whatever, kind of like an arbitrary sort of intervention or something that's happening to you. But, it can be so anxiety provoking, right? And I've spoken to people where there's this ripple effect that happens. It's not just about them. Their mothers or their parents become hyper anxious. Everyone else, there's like this anxiety that spreads. That's documented, by the way, in research in the United States. I know this might be slightly tangential to your question.
No, go ahead.
But I think it's relevant to say that there was really good research that was done that was showing that when there was a police shooting of a racialized black man in the United States, there's this ripple effect of anxiety that actually kind of sweeps across the country, right? And, it was documented in this one really rigorous sort of research or study. But I feel like that's also something we can recognize, let's say with border police, and we think about citizenship deprivation, talking about racist sort of strategies that are occurring. Shamima Begum, her citizenship deprivation, how that impacted not only obviously her, and she's the one that we're most concerned about, but many Muslims are also concerned. Suddenly, recognizing the conditionality of their citizenship, and that they might be rendered stateless. Again, what is the experience of that for us? How do we make sense of that? So, I mean, I think, all these things are quite racist already. Again, hostility towards undocumented migrants, like the hostile environment policies that were put in place by Theresa May, of trying to find people, locate people who are undocumented, telling them to leave the country. That not only obviously affects Muslims, but there's what we call intersectional, right? So it might impact someone who's not white, but also probably because of how many of the people who are undocumented, were coming from, maybe the Middle East, from Syria and other places, also impacts Muslims. And then they enter into various other logics of security as well. So I guess I'm trying to take a fairly complicated question and make it a little bit more digestible. But yeah, I think there's a lot to this that we need to hold on to.
No, absolutely. I think what comes to mind for me is I do like just talking about and discussing all the different policies and how they're affecting different people, as you say, not just Muslims, but in all walks of life.
Yeah.
In all parts of our lives, whether it is education or policing. It makes me think, how should we respond? Is there, just in your research or in your clinical, in a clinical setting, maybe even on a more individual level, and then thinking about organizations as well, how should we as Muslims be responding to some of these policies? Because we could go towards the extreme and maybe just hating the West or hating, I don't know, the UK government for putting whatever policies in place.
Yeah.
But that's not going to get us anywhere. So, yeah, from your research and your thinking and your reading around all of this, what might be a more positive response?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we should always hate injustice. But, this is where we belong, and we need to make the world better for all of us. I mean, that's what we're working towards, right? And it's not only about for us as Muslims, right? I mean, when we're trying to protect the dignity and rights of people, for us in Islam, it's a fundamental cornerstone of our responsibility towards all of humanity as well, right? Like, this isn't something that is negotiable. I think in terms of what to do, I mean, my first advice for anyone listening, it's always important to emphasize that you never act alone in the sense of resisting, let's say, the prevent policy or anything else, whatever racist policy or strategy you're upset about. We need to always work together. We always need to do things as a community. And to that, I think we need to also think about wider forms of solidarity, just with concerned groups, like stop and search policies. All of these actually follow very similar logics. There's a prevent database for people who are identified as pre-criminal, but there's also a gang matrix for Black youth who are identified, or stop and search on the street, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of obvious cause for us to work together, and develop wider solidarity, and I think also to put these things together, that we are, we see prevent, we see stop and search policies, we see all these different policies towards undocumented migrants. We see these all as symptoms of a wider issue. And the wider issue is what we're trying to address, right? And I always tell people that, because often I get addressed that, like, okay, what do you want to do about prevent? And I always begin by telling them that, look, for me, prevent is more of a symptom of a problem. If we were to just remove prevent tomorrow, that'd be good, insofar as that less Muslims are going to be affected, etc. But we need to understand where this is coming from. Like, how is it developing? How does it become into policy? How are Islamophobic, racist, xenophobic discourses becoming so quickly anchored and politically, justified, right? And I think if we don't all work together to look at these root causes, I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic. I know you want it to be hopeful, but we can and should take with the signs that things aren't looking great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think not only here in the UK, but across the global north, we're seeing far more normalization of Islamophobic, of far right, sort of what's called far right, you know, xenophobic attitudes, you know, more politicians being normalized for that sort of rhetoric. So things aren't looking that great. And that should also inspire us. I know we need to be hopeful, but that hope will come from our action, right? We need to take with the causes that right now, that's, you know, things aren't that bright, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Are there cases in your experience that have come to you as a clinical psychologist where this person has experienced Islamophobia? What are anything that you can share in terms of addressing that, or, you know, just discussing what their experience was to get to a place where perhaps I don't know what the end goal would be. Would it be for them to maybe not feel so angry or whatever it might be? Is there a case study that you can share with us there?
I actually bring up, I think, a number of those case studies in the book. But if I return to Ibrahim, I bring him up in the book for two reasons. One, about the fact that therapist or that psychologist in prison was teaching him mindfulness, despite the fact that he was actually still in a place of threat. Actually, he was still under threat. He was still under suffocation. And I think we tend to have a blind spot towards Muslims in prisons, I think, as a community, but we need to remember that 15% of the British prison population are actually Muslims, compared to 5% of the wider population, right? So they're overrepresented in prisons, and prisons are also acute places of Islamophobia. And so I tend to think through that question of how do we support people who've experienced Islamophobia. I tend to think through this sort of gap in the community in terms of Muslim prisoners to make sense of that. And I think one thing that is that comes to my mind from people who who feel like they've been suffering, let's say, from state violence, police violence. It doesn't actually only apply here to the UK. It'll apply anywhere else. Is that, yes, there is something of, okay, how do we support this individual in front of us, right? What are the sort of symptoms that they're finding very difficult, you know, the experience that they're finding very difficult? I think it begins with bearing witness. I always tend to emphasize that. So, this is also something that's fundamental for us as Muslims, is that we're just, first of all, just bearing witness to a person who, in most cases, people who experience Islamophobia in different ways, especially when it's more of the legitimized forms of Islamophobia, they keep it to themselves. They really do. They, you know, this is also, I think, kind of documented in research. You know, people will withhold sharing these experiences with others. So bearing witness, working with the individual, but a part that's very important for me, at least, is to work towards helping them, you know, protecting them more broadly than what we can do in the therapeutic setting, right? And so often when I give therapy, I don't speak in I speak in we, as in there's this imagined community behind me, behind all of us. We're there to support that individual and protect them. Let's say if they're afraid that, you know, police are going to come and take their children away randomly at any point in time. And this is just something that is this profound fear that they're tangling with, you know, and to consider, okay, what are the systems that we need to put in place that we're learning through this individual to protect them from these sort of experiences, that they feel protected. They're not only being treated, but they actually feel a sense of protection coming from the community itself. And I think that's, I'm not maybe phrasing it in a way that's coherent, that can be like, okay, just here's a cookie cutter recipe, do ABC, right? But it's much more about, I think, just a philosophy or a spirit of, it's not just about what occurs in therapy. It's about learning through people's distress to recognize what we as a Muslim community should all be shouldering to support this individual.
Right. I guess sticking with Islamophobia and mental health support that we have out there, as you mentioned, perhaps people are less sort of comfortable with sharing the experiences that they have had. To seek counselling or support might be really difficult. So what do you think there is an importance in highlighting that, Muslim mental health practitioner or seeing a therapist is really important and is something that should be valued and should be, something that individuals do to seek support?
Yeah, absolutely. And mashallah, as Inspirited Minds, you guys are certainly already filling that gap, right? So I think there's something very important about, and I always insist, I know there's a lot of tensions that I'm holding on to. Like I can mention, an NHS setting because of prevent policy might potentially be racist. And I often get that question. And in fact, I got it at the book launch with, where Inspirited Minds was as well. It's a very legitimate question. Ultimately, if someone is needs to speak with someone, then they should go and find someone to speak with, right? And there's no denying that what groups like Inspirited Minds and others are doing is providing a place that would feel safer and more secure, than potentially going to the NHS, let's say, if they're aware of the prevent policy that's in place, right? Just that simple awareness of, I might be discriminated against, not because they think or are acting in any strange way, right? They just feel like, I'm going to be racialized as a Muslim. I'm going to enter into all these different logics I mentioned with Ahmed and Layla and everything else. So I think it's very important that, that people support Inspirited Minds and, other groups, mashallah, who are, I think of them as doors, that we need to make these doors far more visible. I've always also encouraged that every mosque should certainly have at least made available that door that, like, if someone comes in a state of distress, go through here, right? And you should be able to find that support in case you need someone to speak with. So I think that's a basic level, I would say. I think fundamentally, building on that, I think we need to consider, obviously the Muslim groups like Inspirited Minds and others, we're not going to be able to, right now, as we see it, we're fairly small, right? And obviously most people are probably going to go through the NHS and things like that, right? So we have, I think, wider concerns of, what do we actually have to build moving forward in case, let's say, there's more discriminatory policies that get embedded within the NHS. And again, it's not only just about Muslims. We know there's more police presence in the NHS. There's actually more police presence in schools. There's a lot of things that are happening. So how are we to develop moving onwards to create truly safe and secure places, support systems, holistic support systems for Muslims who are in distress that would not only speak to their individual experience, but also to the needs of the entire community, right? And also I'm also thinking about housing, I'm thinking about women's shelters, I'm thinking about all these things, right? How do we develop a much more coherent, safe and secure spaces for Muslims much more holistically?
Yeah, I mean, amazing question. It sounds like so much work, on our part as a community to do that. But it's also, I think, what you mentioned before about collaborating with other people around us.
Yeah.
To make sure that we are paving the way for some of those policies that are a bit more inclusive and not so targeting or putting a negative lens on Muslims in general, or people that are non-white.
Yeah.
In your book, you do mention the Muslim mind.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit more. That's
a really good question. I mean, I was just speaking to the Muslim mind, not as something that exists. There's nothing about the mind that's particularly Muslim. It's just to say that I think there's something about Muslim thinking and behavior that elicits very particular fantasies, you can say, in the Western world, right? So anger being one of them, right? So, you take a white person who's angry about the political affairs, you take a Muslim that's angry about political affairs. There's something about that Muslim mind.
It's suddenly much more fearful, suddenly much more...
exactly.
Anything could happen at any moment.
That's right. That's exactly
risky.
it. That's it. And potentially that, that Muslims, yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, anger is actually a really, really important example here. And we see that with people's, let's say, emotional reactions to what was happening in the Middle East. I actually can bring an example to that. I do bring an example to that in the book, which is the case of Khalid, who he was flagged. I mean, his story is a little bit longer, but he was essentially charged with extremism, so to speak. Well, all the charges were dropped by a judge, by a court. I mean, the whole thing was just ridiculous. But the probation officer wouldn't let it go. And the reasoning why Khalid was still vulnerable was because Khalid still displayed with altruism. And altruism is that sort of selflessness. In psychological research, altruism is considered a really positive thing. But because Khalid is Muslim, that sense of altruism, that sense of, I guess you can say that emotional hurt that he experiences knowing that Muslims are suffering, let's say, at the hands of an oppressor or a tyrant in other places in the world. That's seen as a vulnerability. It's written down as a vulnerability, as a risk factor, etc. So that sort of that emotional configuration that Khalid has, that ironically would be potentially the exact same emotional configuration we're seeing among many, let's say, towards Ukraine.
Which is a natural human instinct.
Exactly, yeah. But one that's also being super, celebrated and lauded, towards Ukraine, that we should all have that concern for Ukraine, and it should impact us emotionally. Suddenly for Khalid, and there's something about, that's why I meant the Muslim mind, in the sense that you can see how there's a very particular way in which that's reassessed, reframed. Exactly.
No, absolutely. It's all worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I hope any sense of worry that we carry from this is more just about, it's really more just to inspire us to take these things more seriously, come together. Having
that awareness, inshallah, for listeners, readers, whether they work in the mental health realm or not, but that awareness, I mean, I've taken away so much from what we've spoken about, but I think awareness is what I'll be taking away for sure.
Yeah. And hopefully, inshallah, it'll also, that awareness will bring us together. I mean, that's really the purpose of the book. I don't have answers, by the way, to many things and many of the issues I'm bringing up. I mean, the purpose is really just to say, look, there's all these different things. And one thing we haven't spoken about yet is not necessarily just about, so we brought up a lot of cases about policing and security, but there's also about neoliberalism, which is more about the political economy and how the general population is being increasingly suffocated through austerity policies, budget cuts, things like that,
right,
which we know in research has also a more detrimental impact on Muslim communities, right? So that's a different way of coming to this issue as well, of okay, there's Muslims who are in distress, but many Muslims are in distress because of what's happening in terms of the economy itself. And where do we come in as Muslim mental health professionals to support these people, right? Because there's been a long-standing critique of the side disciplines, psychiatry, psychology, counseling, etc., that we might be potentially often bandaging, socio-political, economical issues, right? Like that people might be suffering from poverty, right? And increasingly suffocated through the cost of living crisis. And now we come in as Muslim mental health professionals, and we might have an attitude of like, we might bring in more centrality towards Allah and things like that, right? And our therapeutic techniques. But how are we really addressing these issues of cost of living that people are actually experiencing? I think these are legitimate questions that have long been asked to the wider professions, and I think these are questions that we as Muslims also need to take more seriously.
Absolutely, especially for professionals, as you say, that kind of notion of addressing the symptoms or potentially maybe helping a patient through something. As somebody who's sought therapy myself, I do feel like some of those methods that you pick up or that you learn are very much to help you continue through life, as a relatively happy, well-adjusted individual. But it's not, as you say, going to the root cause of things.
Yeah.
So very, very thought-provoking for sure.
Inshallah.
Very thought-provoking. I guess I want to dive in a little bit more now into because I know that you're very interested in the political side of things and how policies or your belief as well that nothing is not political.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about that. And I know that's a very general, sweeping kind of question, but anything that you want to share about that.
Yeah, okay. I should say I think that question is excellent as is, yeah, so don't ever change it. Because that's exactly how I would answer it. I mean, I think first and foremost, I actually have an entire chapter dedicated to the book of just thinking about like, where do we locate politics? What is political, etc. I'm not going to summarize the chapter, but I think there is something to say about how everything has a political function. Okay, now that sounds convoluted and complicated, but I think the example of the whole cost of living crisis is actually a very good example of that, right? Like even if a therapist comes in with the best of intentions, I want to help you with your anxiety, right? Even if that's not their intention per se to, maybe bandage is too strong of a word, but I'll just hold on to bandage, right? Like just really to bandage the financial constraints that's occurring to this Muslim and to like their family and everything. There is a function there that's occurring, right? And it's one that is not oblivious to us. Like we know this. We know that many therapeutic services, one very famous one in the NHS, was co-developed by an economist, right? With that purpose of trying to get people to go back to work, to be more productive to society, right? And even if both the therapist and the patient are unaware of that, that's what they're entering, right? That's where that therapeutic space comes from. And there's already very long histories to this, very well documented from psychiatry, from psychology, of like how therapies become popular, which therapies become popular, which ones become funded, like all of these things are things that we as Muslims need to be giving some consideration to. And actually to know on that, I had an idea I was going to point out, which I can't remember right now, so I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
We were talking about politics.
Yeah, I was talking about politics. So there was something about a particular form of therapy.
So not based on economics or stemming from those ideas.
Yeah. So I mean, I think ultimately everything serves a purpose, and that's not to say that just because something is political that means like let's chuck it out the window, right? So for example, I do with intent take a small critique towards mindfulness in some of my writings.
Okay.
I'm not critical of people who use mindfulness, nor am I critical of like mindfulness itself, right? I should also admit I use mindfulness techniques, right? So that's not the point. The point is just charting where mindfulness came from, how, it was...
That it became so popular and established.
Exactly. And there's a really fantastic special issue. I mean, I don't have to mention this, but there's a special issue in transcultural psychiatry that spoke about the practice of mindfulness and how it was imported into the West, right? Into the Western world. And what's interesting about how mindfulness as a therapeutic technique was imported is that it came in and it went through this translation of entering into this like capitalist way of being, right? Of like really just trying to help people, ground them, manage their breathing, their sense of being better for the purpose of becoming more productive or being, returning to a sense of normality for the purpose of productivity, right? Whereas where it actually originated from, mindfulness had a whole ethical framework around it, right? And all that ethical framework was completely erased in the process of importing and translating it here.
Right.
And again, that's not it's absolutely
not negating that it's useful.
It's not negating
its
use
lives.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. But if we need to be mindful of what that actually means, right? What does that mean? It's I think very indicative of one. What does it mean to translate Islamic ideas and practices in the world we live in today, right? And I need to say that, it's very well understood that Islam can serve state purposes, like this, the purpose of the state, the purpose of the economy. This isn't something that I think most people, if they think of certain countries, one whose name rhymes with Saudi Arabia, I'm just going to say it up front, we can understand that Islam and, faith and religion can be perverted, or not, even if not by intent perverted, but it can be framed in certain ways for particular purposes. That's my point. And so I think for us who are interested in Islamic psychology, or Muslims interested in bringing Islam more into psychology and whatever, I think that the politics is something we need to hold on to, because we have to consider, what are we translating? What purpose does it serve into the wider framework beyond just the theory of, okay, let's bring someone close to Allah. And I bring up a case, I'll just say, I know I'm talking a lot, so I apologize.
No, it's okay, carry on.
But, I bring a case, it's a semi-fictional case. It's actually many real world cases I'm putting together into one person. And I call her Amal, a Muslim woman who is experiencing anxiety. And, she is experiencing the sharp end of the cost of living crisis. Everything is really constricted. And she goes to see another Muslim therapist who works on developing, a closer relationship with Allah and taqwa and God consciousness, etc. Which, alhamdulillah, is good. You see, like, this is where things become a little bit awkward to talk about, because it's not to say that those things are bad. They certainly are. But if someone is being suffocated financially, right, through a cost of living crisis, what are we doing when we're just trying to get the person to accept the scenario that they're in, right? Not necessarily accept, but part of I guess the outcome is sort of, okay, get through this. You
Completely.
can get, and we need to, I think, sit down with this a little bit more. I'm not saying I have an answer to that, because these are like way bigger questions. And to be also frank, I think most of these discussions I've ever had have always been with non-Muslims, to be very frank about that, right? Like, I think many non-Muslims have engaged in these sort of questions, like, what exactly are we doing? How do we not bandage, the socio-political conditions of people? Palestine is actually a really good example of that. There's a really fantastic book called Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, what's the role of therapy under occupation? You know, like these are like obvious questions that I think seem obvious to us when we say it out loud, but like I think as a Muslim community we need to be attending to them a little bit more and thinking through what are we going to do about it, even if we still make a conscious point to say, okay, I still think it's important to improve this person's God consciousness or taqwa or whatever it might be. At least it's a conscious decision and not simply an artifact of what we always do, for example.
Yes, absolutely. I think, again, bringing it back to that awareness of knowing the purpose behind whether it's policy or the way that we're conducting our counselling session or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I think it's so, so valuable. So, I mean, the case that you mentioned with kind of this woman that is suffering with anxiety, and she's got all these other, it's not a holistic kind of treatment, as you mentioned. It's very much how do we help you through the anxiety, rather than what are those fundamental things or situations that have led to you having these, this discomfort or this anxiety in the first place. Yeah. I think there are lots of overarching themes or things that one could point to where it's leading to people having more mental health concerns or episodes or psychosis. Maybe there is a correlation between certain policies or the way that the world is going. Which, it's just lots of questions, which inshallah will bring up some answers.
Inshallah. I if I can actually add one point to that, because when you were summarizing, I think you summarized it really well, and you reminded me, and I had mentioned this 2 days ago, so I'll say in a quick point. The British Psychological Society did a report a few years back looking at therapists working in the NHS. Mm-hmm. I think specifically therapists working under IAPT, and for people who don't know IAPT, it's a sort of short-term, brief cognitive behavioral therapy to help manage people's symptoms, to go back to work or going back.
It's making me a little bit upset, to be honest. If I can be completely frank, I feel like it's making me think about, well, why do I have to sort of, I want to get through my difficulties, yes, but at the same time, I want to be a part of addressing some of those bigger things in society that are leading people down this path, which are so, it's almost like, I forget, I'm sorry, this psychologist who did the study of Rat Park, where they put the rats in a sort of a heaven for rats, where it's sort of a beautiful cage and they have spinning wheels or whatever else to do. Yeah. And then they're given the option to have... and I'm sure I'll make mistakes in my explanation, but where they can take drugs essentially, or just have some kind of sugary drink, I forget. Yeah. And then they have another situation where they put rats in a park that has no amenities, there's no spinning wheel, there, it's unattractive and it's ugly, and they don't have the places where they can go and exercise, etc., etc. And one of the conclusions, at least, is that in the rat park that's not heaven, they will consistently go to that sugary, I'm sorry, not the sugary one, the drug concoction that they've got for them all the time, and they will end up dead after, let's say a number of weeks. Yeah. Whereas the other rats, where they're in a situation where it's more amenities, more whatever else, other rats to congregate with.
They were psychologically healthy rats,
Exactly. And I think we do need to consider those life situations that lead to people suffering and are leading to increased, mental health problems. And we haven't even touched on yet sort of COVID and maybe the impact of that on students and younger people as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a big part, actually. I do touch upon that in that chapter on neoliberalism, because COVID had a very particular impact on marginalized populations anyway, right? So like COVID really revealed all the different ways people and groups are marginalized in society. That's what COVID did. It didn't do it. I mean, COVID did a lot of things, but it certainly revealed who has easier access to healthcare, who's on the front lines, who's whatever, right?
Who are
like,
on the fringes of those.
Exactly. Who's receiving services, whatever it might be. And I think what's interesting, like say, you know, the whole that whole rat experiment is a really good example, because what bringing back to that British psychological study, imagine there was a rat therapist now in the hell part of that rat chamber, and they had to give therapy. So I think what's very revealing is how that therapist experiences their practice. And the British Psychological Society study found that, I think, I believe, okay, so I might be saying the wrong stat about the wrong thing, but I'm just going to go ahead and say, I think 50% of therapists working in IAPT are depressed themselves, right? And there's a lot that's revealing there, right? Because think about that. Like, the rat therapist working in the hell chamber will know that, oh, it's because we're basically being suffocated, right? And they'll feel like the work that they're doing is always constantly sort of, you know, facing the juggernaut, which is reality, right?
Just
like,
firefighting.
It's firefighting, exactly, right? And it can be very depressing, because obviously you'll see a patient and you'll see them again, and it's always just continuously firefighting, as you said. So I think there's a lot for us as a community to be able to sit down and hold on to. And again, I don't want to admonish anyone, any Muslim therapists out there, including myself. This is how we come to practice, right? This is what we're accepting. I'm just hoping to inspire us to think a little bit further, and how do we come together to work through this, inshallah.
No, absolutely. I guess it would be great to carry on talking about the book and maybe delve a little bit more into you, the writer behind the book, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it would be great to just hear a little bit more of what actually inspired you to go into psychology. Maybe take us back into a younger self, and what inspired you originally to get into this line of work.
Okay, so I guess we're going to Christopher Nolan this conversation. I'll start from the beginning, right? And then everyone understands everything. Yeah, no, so I personally have a long-standing history of working with the Muslim community. So I've worked with Muslim youth and different Muslim youth groups for a long time growing up. And that was something that's very important to me. And I think, like many, we kind of recognize that there's issues in the community, which is sort of what brought me into psychology as a whole. I was initially going under the path of neuroscience, but I realized, maybe clinical psychology is a more appropriate path. And I was supported by my father at the time. My mother had long since passed away, but she was the main inspiration of that connection to the community. Now, to make a long story short, because of that interest in the community, I was very interested in Islamophobia. So that's something I've always taken very seriously. And so my interest in Islamophobia on the one hand, my training and background in clinical psychology is actually sort of cultural psychology. I was very interested in how people experience suffering and distress differently across the world, which is why I brought up that mindfulness example, right? So that's something that's always been my main sort of fascination, is that mental health is not technically a global construct, right? Like, people experience healing differently, they experience distress differently. And so I worked largely with migrant communities, refugees, asylum seekers in my training, my background, obviously many Muslims in that case as well. And so I realized through all of this that I felt like in my training there was a lot, when you're working with migrants and refugees and marginalized communities, there's something that I always found uncomfortable, which is that there's a lot of essentializing. Essentializing is like being reductive of the community in front of you. You'd be like, oh, this group is from Pakistan. What do Pakistanis eat and think, and how do they believe, and tell us more about their faith? What do Muslims think about jinn? And like, you have like these really sort of reductive conversations that have been like totally just like
Yeah.
Like I had enough with at one point. I think over the years, it's not that there's no use to these conversations at all. So I'm not throwing everything away. My point is that I feel like there was a lack of what we call reflexivity. Like who are we? Like how do we think of ourselves? Like, so that's where the politics came in. How are we aware of our own positioning in society, our role in society, things like that. So that's sort of how my trajectory went into bringing racism, Islamophobia, culture, and all that under politics.
It sounds like you sort of wanted to understand yourself and your own community more to even be able to then explain who you are.
Yeah. And, the Muslim community is very complicated. I used to consult, I used to work officially as sort of like a cultural consultant.
Mm-hmm.
So cases like a mental health, like a hospital would have a case of a Muslim man or woman who's experiencing jinn. And so I would go and be part of the team and like write up a clinical file and try to support them.
Mm-hmm.
But jinn, just like even within us among Muslims, we often talk about jinn as if it's a one thing, but the Muslim communities across the world have different ways of thinking of jinn and things like that. So it's way more complicated there already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like especially within Islam and Muslims. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I feel like there's something about sort of just the ideological sort of attitudes of mental health institutions here that I'm really interested in. So that it kind of brought it back to like, not who are we, who are you, right? Let's talk about that. Because I think it kind of, there's this like, oh, we're apolitical, like we're the normal apolitical sort of institution way of looking at things. Mm-hmm. You guys are the Muslims. We are here to make things more sensitive and convenient for you. And there's something about that sort of relationship that I find a little bit problematic.
A little bit worrying.
Yes.
Like almost like things can't sort of align. It's almost like that question of, as well, like science and religion can't work together kind of notion as well.
Yeah, exactly. They might come with all these things. And by the way, like this isn't something that's coming from me, like people have questioned that point of what I'm saying, like cultural competence, like being competent towards like, oh, you're a Muslim, so here's like the competency package for you. So there's someone by the name of Jonathan Metzl in the United States. He developed alternatively, he developed something called structural competence, which is not to be aware of, just simply aware of other people's cultures, but being aware of one's own structures that you're operating in, recognizing the political economy that you're in, like let's say austerity, things like that. So that structural competence is an interesting alternative. Like we can still be critical of it, but it's an interesting alternative way of like educating mental health professionals. Don't essentialize. Think about where you are. Where are you based in society? What's your own ideological sort of biases and packages that you're carrying? And I think there's something there that we can hold on to.
Absolutely. I think that also kind of makes me think about just training that institutions might provide for their employees, whatever institution it might be.
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of stuff recently that I've noticed anyway, just about sort of being aware of other people in the workplace and that there are people that might have different beliefs or views to yourself, that kind of inclusion and diversity training that might be offered. I think those are other kind of ideas that, by understanding what you've mentioned, will make them more inclusive and better.
Yeah.
So that they're not just...
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly it. So I think there's an emphasis on that. I think there is something about representation that's important in, let's say, different mental health teams and stuff like that. But there is maybe some sort of political function of almost being only focused on that as well, I should say, right? Like, I'll give an honest example. Like, if there was a policy that was totally racist, I'm not going to call any names right now. Let's say there's a policy that's totally racist that's embedded within mental health institutions. But the focus is on having then more diverse teams and having more Muslims working with us. Does that really address the issue, right? It might bandage the issue to an extent. And I think often healthcare thinks in line of having as much diversity as possible. But, you know, I think the responsibility is on us as a community of understanding where Islamophobia comes from. How does it operate? Not letting them tell us, oh, Islamophobia is simply lack of representation and having a Muslim voice at the table, right? Okay, fine. That's your opinion. Let's take with the evidence now, right? Like, we have so many decades and decades of evidence now. You know, I think the idea of representation was already long sort of confronted, especially in the United States, this idea of representation politics. You know, there was still a mass incarceration of Black youth under the presidency of Obama. Obama is the president. Still a huge mass incarceration of Black youth. How are we making sense of these two things? What would that mean for us as Muslims if every single NHS manager was a Muslim? Would that solve all the issues? These are questions, you know, I'm not answering them. I'm giving an indication what my answer is. But my point isn't to answer them. My point is for us to consider with history. Let's take it historically. Let's take with evidence and move from there.
Absolutely. I think just from what we're talking about now, it almost sounds like I'm hoping a second book is.
I'm never writing a book again, so just to let you know, this podcast is the end of my career. No. Inshallah.
What would you say was so hard? Because I know earlier you mentioned that you did take up the offer in not such a good time.
Yeah, it wasn't a good time. I think it was a little bit more personal. I had my children are very young. Had a lot going on, and so I took it up because it was an offer that I thought, okay, maybe I'll do what I can, and I prayed Allah puts barakah in it. You know, I guess I'll see based on the reception of this book, but I prefer not having to write another book, but having us all come together more in terms of discussions. Like if we were to create spaces and have more opportunities for all of us to come together and discuss these things, that would be worth 100 books. You know, that would be worth so much more than that. And I think, you know, the book is really supposed to just be like that instigator. But I'm hoping from now onwards we can create more like opportunities to discuss these issues, inshallah.
Inshallah, it will be something that sparks lots of conversation and moving forwards, inshallah. I guess we are coming towards the end of the podcast. I had a couple of final questions for you. Really, firstly, your advice to someone who, and you have touched on this as we were talking, but your advice to somebody who has gone through a traumatic or Islamophobic experience in their life. And then secondly, also addressing mental health practitioners and their sort of way of helping Muslims overcome that trauma, which again we have touched on. But as a final,
these are good ways of it's a good way of finalizing. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, anyone who's experienced distress or is in a state of distress, they should reach out, you know, as difficult as that might be. And certainly there's groups like Inspirited Minds, there's other groups, right, that offer Muslim services, and there are services that I know of that are free as well, offered by Muslims. And certainly people can reach out to me or other places to find out who they can go to, or obviously Inspirited Minds, right? So the rule of thumb is that if someone needs help, they should go seek it, right? And then obviously we're going to deal, it's on us as a community to find ways of protecting them further, even if they have to go through the NHS and something happens, let's say. And I know cases of people who went to the NHS and let's say something like prevent referral happens. Okay, then we'll develop, and we have ways of protecting you even further, inshallah. So as a rule of thumb, if you need support, seek support, right? And for Muslim mental health professionals themselves, I mean, I think what I would like my advice to all of us is to be, I guess, more politically minded about our work. And for us to, I guess, also have that a little bit more nuance in Islamophobia and where it comes from, because it also affects us. I would be hard pressed. I've yet to speak to any Muslim therapist who went through training that didn't share with me some experience of their own, self-censorship or suffocation or just sort of that anxiety. So we experience it as well. We rarely talk about it among ourselves. I mean, some of us might, right? But like, we really need to come together and recognize that what we're going through is just like a tip of the iceberg type of thing.
As a professional body.
As a professional body, as just all these Muslim therapists, we've all experienced something. What are we experiencing? I think I know many Muslim therapists who, let's say, are going through training, and they can't wait to finish so that they can finally get out of like a suffocating environment that they're in their training, right? But I think we need to be able to sit down with that more. Not to say that person should just go back in there, but I'm saying that we as a community need to sit down more and be like, okay, what is happening?
Why?
Yeah, why is it happening? And I think we need to then pay most attention to, and that's my final piece of advice, we need to pay most attention to those who are most marginalized in the community. Because those who are most marginalized in the community are most revealing of how Islamophobia operates, right? I'm thinking about prisoners. I'm thinking about undocumented migrants. There's many people who are incredibly marginalized on many different levels. And they reveal to us, all these different circumstances that we need to be paying attention to when it comes to providing therapy in experiences of Islamophobia.
Absolutely. I guess my final question, Tarek, was to ask you what you envisage your readers taking away from your book, or what you hope your readers will take away from your book, and then any listeners or viewers who would like to get a copy, how can they get one?
Okay. So yeah, I think, in a nutshell, I guess psychology and therapeutic settings are not apolitical, and that matters for Muslims. So that would be the nutshell, right? And where to get a copy? You can get a copy off, I think, almost most online retailers, from what I know of. But what I can do is, inshallah, hopefully offer a discount code, maybe if anyone goes through Inspirited Minds.
Inshallah. And
that way, if you go through the main publisher website, which is Sage, and put in the discount code, they can get 25% off, inshallah. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair, for joining me on the Mindful Muslim podcast today. Really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and views and thoughts and asking thought-provoking questions.
Jazakallah for having me. I mean, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to just have a space to share my thoughts as well. So Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair for watching and listening to this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast. Inshallah, you found it a useful one, and I will see you on the next one.